out, we often get asked, what are the best and quickest ways of trying to improve that Net Promoter? Which, let's face it, is just a score, and I'm going to touch on quantifying the benefits of that a little bit later on. But how do you go about improving it quickly and effectively, and putting strategies in place to give you the biggest bang for your buck? Now, I promise you I'm not going to talk too much about Bright at all, but just to contextualise who we are. So over the past 18 years, we've conducted thousands upon thousands of operational benchmarking studies of both contact centres and customer service operations. And we've surveyed millions of customers and conducted millions of employee engagement surveys. So we genuinely have had the privilege of working with a whole range of different brands and a lot of experience in understanding what it takes to become truly best in class. And I suppose when we look at the very top performers, especially the ones with the top NPS scores, there's something that resonates as a kind of commonality between those businesses. And that's typically that those top performers have a really strong understanding, and they continually and constantly measure operational performance. They're regularly collecting employee engagement data, and they're obviously pulling together an impressive voice of customer source of information. But they're not measuring these three things in isolation. These three things don't sit in separate departments. They're collectively and holistically measuring these things, and they understand the drivers between the three. And we've typically seen the best performers who have that ability to grasp those three things together see their Net Promoter Score improve by usually a 20 to 30 point gap within as little as 6 to 9 months. And that's really what I'm going to focus on over the course of the next 10 minutes or so. What I'm talking about in the contact centre is looking at things like accessibility to agents and advisors having their own customer feedback coming to them so that they can develop their own skills and behaviours. All the way through to departments, teams, potentially channels, or different lines and touch points that might be coming into a context. Survey in real time, we've touched a little bit on some of the previous presentations, but this is crucial. Not only because if you're serving a customer days and weeks after an interaction, they're often going to mix it up with other moments in time and not necessarily give you the information that you need. But more importantly, without the real-time element, you completely miss that opportunity to close the loop with customers, go back to them and put things right. And there's no better way of turning a detractor to a promoter than doing that very thing of picking up the phone and saying, look, I'm really sorry, we got your feedback, we've listened, we'd like to put things right. And from the show of hands in the previous presentation, that still isn't happening anywhere near enough in the contact center. Automate, don't cherry pick. If we want to get real clarity of insight and a true reflection of what our NPS score is, we need to make sure that it doesn't carry any bias. So giving agents the opportunity to send a survey after the end of an interaction is fraught with that, but still lots and lots of businesses are doing that. It's highly unlikely that an agent who's completely mucked up the interaction is going to send a survey, and it's unrealistic for us to expect them to do it. Finding the links. Now this is something that we strongly recommend. Just collecting feedback is only a piece of the puzzle. We need to be able to link it back to our operational data and what our employees are telling us. So an example of that might be, if we're measuring quality and we have our quality team sat there looking at maybe 5 or 6 calls per advisor per month, if that's telling us one thing, but our customers are telling us something completely different, we've got a disconnect there that we need to address. Share the insight. Again, from the previous presentations, there's been some fantastic examples of this. But in a contact centre, that's often the big touch point area, and we might be collecting some hugely valuable information that we can give to our marketing colleagues, or our compliance colleagues, or our delivery colleagues, whatever that might be. But unless we're creating this real-time pot of information, it's very difficult for those departments to drive any real change. And often they may be the ones that are causing the problem in the first place, that are driving all of this avoidable contact into the centre. So using that to drive quantitative analysis to help change is vital. And take action quickly. I'm sure everyone's going to talk about this often today, but far too often, lots of organisations aren't doing anything with their insight at all. They're doing the listening bit really well, but they're not necessarily following through and making anything happen, both from a customer point of view, but also within the operation. So we looked at 170,000 pieces of data for this exercise, and we looked at things like customer efforts, agent engagement, agent knowledge, and we found that there was a very clear correlation between those elements. So if customers weren't happy with customer efforts or engagement or knowledge, they were more than likely to go away and be detractors, and the converse to that as well. And that leads me on to stage 3, setting advisor targets. I often see a lot of businesses who set an NPS target at an agent level. Now, I have a real challenge with that, because often, from the huge amounts of work we've done with the advisor world, they have very little understanding of what NPS is in the first place. And more importantly, they really don't understand how they can influence it. And an NPS agent level target can often come with a lot of, discontent, because there's other things that will impact a customer leaving an NPS score out of the span of control of an agent, so it could be counterproductive. So we focus typically on things like knowledge, professionalism and ownership, things that an agent can control, and things that they can be trained on and coached on and continually monitored and managed. But at the same time, having your business control people, your analysts, your root cause people, focusing on things like customer effort, resolution, call drivers. If you can separate those two things and have those different worlds focusing on these key issues for customers, this will drive the Net Promoter Score in the first place. So this will start having a very positive impact. And actually, one of the world's biggest travel companies adopted this approach and saw their Net Promoter Score in the contact centres across Europe improved by 40 points in about 5.5 months. All about reprioritising how they're setting those targets. Focus where it matters most. Now, this is a bit of a bugbearer for us at Bright, in terms of often in contact centres we're measuring things that are easy pieces of information to get hold of, rather than things that are driving true value. So let me give you an example. The classic 80-20 rule in a contact centre, 80% of calls answered within 20 seconds. It's a legacy measure that lots and lots of businesses use still today. And I totally understand why that's there, because it's important from a resource planning point of view. But actually, only 20% of the UK is getting anywhere near that target. So there's huge amounts of effort going into trying to achieve this with very little success. But what's more startling is actually, from all of our research, we've proven that typically the speed of answer breaking point is about 120 seconds, not 20 seconds, 120 seconds. So imagine the reprioritisation of effort from answering the phone as quickly as possible into other things that customers value, like resolution, like agent engagement, like knowledge, that will have a far greater impact on our overall scores. And customer insight is there for that very reason, to help you understand those breaking points and understand how to set up your business that will cater for customers at a cost model that you can afford. There is almost a one-to-one ratio between employee net promoter and customer net promoter scores. So what I mean by that is that when an employee might be surveyed and asked, would you recommend this business as a place of work to your friends and family? So that's a clear one-to-one ratio. So what I'm meaning by that is, if you improve your employee net promoter by 1 point, your customer net promoter should follow suit. Now, often in the contact centre world, that isn't measured. In fact, they heavily rely on an annualised HR survey that comes out too late, and we can't do very much with that information. And when we do, it's not relevant to the contact centre. That's the challenge. A lot of these businesses don't have the ability to measure employee satisfaction or engagement on a regular basis. So at Bright, we regularly recommend using things like pulse surveys, temperature checks, to assess that employee piece, because it will have a knock-on effect in Net Promoter. And if we dig into this a bit more and look at the dispersion between things like your detractors, your promoters and your passives, actually the passive group presents a real opportunity here. And often, I don't know about you guys, but often we see that we focus on the very best and the very worst, but we tend to forget about this middle group. But this middle group presents a big opportunity, because we found that if you can improve and turn maybe half of your passive group into promoters, that should have somewhere in between a 15 to 20 point improvement in the Net Promoter Score. So the two do sit hand in hand. Find NPS drivers outside the contact centre. I was touching on this before. Often that failure demand comes from other departments, but if they don't know about it and we're not quantifying that, then it's very difficult for them to change. Most customer feedback programs or voice of customer programs will be inviting customers to leave feedback in their own words, what we call verbatim or comment. There's some real gold in that kind of information, and if it can be shared successfully, that can have an enormous impact on the Net Promoter. This is an example of working with a business who was having a big push to try and migrate avoidable contacts onto their website to try to improve their self-service options. And we ran a simple question. Before calling us, did you try and solve your query online? Well, you wouldn't believe the amount of information that came back off this. It was staggering the amount of times customers tried to do this in the first place because they didn't want to call the call centre. Often they don't ever want to call the call centre. And if they could have resolved, they would have been perfectly happy. So that gave us a huge amount of information that could be then fed back to the marketing team to improve FAQs, improve different navigation of the site, simple things, simple changes that was adding to the value from a customer's point of view. Find some correlating links. Coming back to this point about comparing what customers are saying with operational performance, one of the key ways of using this is to identify best and worst performers, whether departments, advisors, groups, departments, however that might look, so that you can start reducing this gap. So on the side here I've got contacts per day, so that might be an efficiency measure of how many calls are my agents getting through, versus something like customer satisfaction. So this pool up in the top circle, those are my top performers. Those are the people that are highly efficient but very good when they speak to people. It's this middle group that I need to focus on. How do I clone these top performers and get that training and coaching model back into these guys? And obviously the outliers, we need to then make some performance management decisions to see how we do that. Doing this kind of approach is a really good way of narrowing that gap from a contact centre point of view, and will have a definite knock-on effect to the Net Promoter Score. And finally, just to finish with, we've touched a little bit on this with the previous presentations, but we strongly recommend using a blended approach to surveys. Channel matching is a big one. If a customer's calling you on telephone, we highly recommend using surveys that fit that same bill. But it's all about trying to find moment-in-time surveys without getting to this black hole of survey fatigue and turning customers off. And this is where the survey design and a test and learn process will have a big impact on the clarity of insight that you're getting and the information that comes back. And often we find things like voice surveys far and away trumps your email and your SMS type formats, both for response levels and also for the level of debate.